The game week. There's nothing like it. There's nothing like rivalry week. And some people from the South want to contend that, Auburn and Alabama is better. Some people want to contend that for America, Army and Navy is better, even though it's completely different. But I bring to you the history and the memories of fans that have lived, that I have talked to you about different fans, whether it was on Facebook, in College Football Universe, whether it was just in my life. I know fans on both sides of this rivalry. And everybody gives me their memories, but we got to go a little bit before the memories. In fact, well before the memories could even start for those around me and for those of you that have talked with me about this rivalry game. Today, we're going to go over the history of the game. I ask you guys to like and subscribe. I apologize to all of you guys for being less active. Had family in town, family matters to deal with. I do plan on getting right back on track here today. So we will get our predictions for Saturday out there. I know we're missing some games tonight. That's okay. And the games during the day, but that's okay, as we're going to hit you with conference championship week and bowl prep very hard as we gear up for the end of the season in the most wonderful time of the year, but it's bittersweet because you could see the football season going away. In 1897, this series began with, of course, Michigan winning the first ever matchup. This series began, but these two states had been at each other's necks ever since American history with these two states had began. Remember the Toledo Strip and the war over that. Michigan wanted to claim territory, which was the Toledo Strip, but Ohio had that claimed. And though it was a bloodless dispute, it was a very passionate and hard argument in which Ohio ended up winning. But on the football field, the first time that they played, the Michigan Wolverines got it done. And it didn't take long with Fielding Yost as the head coach to be able to beat Ohio State 86-0. And the worst part about it is it was halftime when they called the game. Absolute domination. This was a low, all-time low for Ohio State in their 12th year as a football program, getting dominated by, at this time, the champions of the West. And that's where their fight song gets the Michigan Wolverines. They were the champions of the West, as in the Western world. But in 1919, Chick Harley leads Ohio State to their very first victory in the series history. So Ohio State, after all of those years of losing, mind you, they didn't play in consecutive years, but they played most years from 1897 to 1919. After all of those, with a tie or two mixed in there, all those Michigan wins, Ohio State gets their first victory in 1919. And then you could see it. Francis Schmidt, the head coach of Ohio State, they put their pants on one leg at a time, just like everyone else. So what did they do? Bang. Gold Pants start. Gold Pants tradition start in 1934, and you are measured as a Ohio State football player and staff member by how many gold pants do you have. You do not get that if you lose, but if you win, you get it done. And keep in mind, prior to this point, the standard in Western world football, which is just American football at the end of the day, the standard in the West, if you go back to Michigan's fight song, the champions of the West, that was Michigan. And Francis Schmidt was like, no more of that. He's the one who started that gold pants tradition. We go fast forward to 1950 with head coach Wes Fessler for Ohio State. 45 total punts in this Snow Bowl. And what ended up transpiring in this, Vic Janowitz, an eventual Heisman winner, ended up being the punter, and they punted the ball 45 times on in total, 24-21 as far as punts go. What happened in this game was Ohio State, with field positioning battle, was able to get a field goal to go up 3-0. And then a safety off of a blocked punt, or maybe it was a run play. I don't know. There's not great tape on this 1950 Snow Bowl, but there is some. 3-2 was the score, but there is tape out there and you can find it of Vic Janowitz getting his punt blocked for a recovery and a touchdown in the absolute blizzard. This was the Great Appalachian Snowstorm of 1950 or Blizzard of 1950. It took dozens of lives in that era. It was brutal, and these men battling it out there on the gridiron on November 25th, 1950. We should commend them for being as tough as they were right there, because we get this classic that we talk about. And this was when Wes Fessler gets fired and escorts in Woody Hayes. In the first couple of years of Woody Hayes, very underwhelming, but 1954 was the turning point of Woody Hayes' tenure. An undefeated but unsuspecting Ohio State team gets a goal line stand in the Horseshoe to knock off the Michigan Wolverines, a much maligned rivalry to this point in Ohio State's dismay. And this is when the rivalry really took a turn. Ohio State wins the national championship in 1954, and Michigan falls to mediocrity after this point. And it is highlighted towards the end of this long era of Woody Hayes just beating up on that team up north, as he called them, by this 50-14 victory. And in this 50-14 victory, late in the first half, it was 14-14, and Ohio State pulls away. And they are up 42-14 late, and Jim Otis gets his fourth touchdown of the game. And guess what Woody Hayes does? He goes for two. They get it. Allegedly, a reporter was asking Woody Hayes, hey, coach, you're up by 34 points, 5 touchdowns, you're up by so much, and why did you go for two, as Michigan players were super, super upset by this? And his answer was, because they wouldn't let me go for 3. That was his answer. But escort in Bo Schembechler, a former Woody Hayes prodigy. He had been at Ohio State. He had been the coach and a player at Miami of Ohio. And he kicks off the 10-year war with a big upset in 1969 of a team that had a 22-game win streak, number 1 in the country, best team in America, off of a defending national championship in 1968. Bo takes his Michigan Wolverines and absolutely smacks the Ohio State Buckeyes around for 4 quarters, 24-12, absolutely putting Ohio State fans, Ohio State coaches, and most importantly, Woody Hayes in shambles. That team in 1969 that had won 22 games straight dating back to 1968 would be beaten by the Michigan Wolverines. So what do? They get their revenge, as you see Jim Stillwagon right there. 1970, Woody's revenge. He gets his big revenge. He wins the national championship in 1970, and that really highlights the 10-year war as we get to a 1-1 tie here. And speaking of a tie, 1973, the tie. Michigan it is claimed to have outplayed Ohio State. It looked like they outplayed Ohio State, but Ohio State survives in the sense that they were able to clinch a tie in this ball game. And what did the Big Ten do about this when it comes to crowning a champion? So back in 1970, we had the Marshall plane crash that had freshmen being able to not redshirt after that point, and it was very inspirational. It's the reason why Archie Griffin, it's the reason why my great uncle Brian Baschnagel were able to play as true freshmen in 1972. 1973, the true sophomores here, only one team would go on to a bowl game. One team would be clinched into the Rose Bowl game in 1973. One team would sit at home. So how they were going to decide the Big Ten champions after this tie? Well, they did it simply by doing a vote by athletic directors. And it was mishandled, according to Bo Schembechler, much maligned. But in 1973, Michigan sat at home while Ohio State got sent to the Rose Bowl. And a big reason why for Ohio State supporters on why Ohio State got sent there was because simply they were the road team in this game, able to play to a tie. Bo Schembechler very upset by this, and a horrifying 4-year stretch in which, by the way, my uncle and Archie Griffin, the same class, right there on the left, Brian Baschnagel. We had four straight years of not losing to Michigan. The first class ever to not have lost to Michigan with that tie. They won 3 gold pants, beat Michigan 3 times, not losing to Michigan at all. Wow. Just great for a Buckeye fan at this moment in time as they come back from being down 14-7, entering the fourth quarter. A big Ray Griffin with the game tied interception that sets up the game-winning touchdown for, I believe it was Pete Johnson who ended up punching it in. 21-14, Ohio State wins. But Michigan would come back. Apparently, I didn't have that slide. Michigan would come back. They would win the next 3 games, closing out the war, the 10-year war in Michigan. With those final 3 games of winning, won that 10-year war 5-4-1. That's how they outdid Michigan or Ohio State rather in the 10-year war. And last thing I'm going to say is Woody Hayes' career ended in a bowl game, the Citrus Bowl against Clemson. How did that happen? As one team would get sent, well, now you see the impact of the tie. And now you see it tie back to the rivalry. See, what happened is when the tie happened and Michigan undefeated with 1 tie to Ohio State, probably the second best team in the country in 1973. Ohio State gets to go to the Rose Bowl while these guys sit at home. The bowl games completely changed and they added more bowl games and it made us more develop into the bowl games extensively that we see today and that we've seen for decades, a couple of decades now. So in 1978, Woody Hayes' career comes to an end because of an incident of which he punched a linebacker for the Clemson Tigers, their opponent in that bowl game in 1978. That abruptly ended Woody Hayes' career. He went out in a very controversial way, but still a legend at Ohio State nonetheless. The guy to replace him was Earl Bruce, and though he had success against Michigan and had some success against Bo Schembechler, Earl Bruce was coming to an end in his tenure as the last couple of years led to some mediocrity. And this underwhelming Ohio State team had these headbands on for Earl Bruce. Mind you, he was still a very successful coach at Ohio State. They had these headbands on, and they all said Earl. Earl did not like the headbands at first, and then he saw them, and he was just touched. And they went out, and they battled, and they won that football game as underdogs against the University of Michigan for their head coach, Earl Bruce. And then in comes John Cooper. And this is where we get to the memories. This is the first memory that I have that wasn't, of course, a memory that could be attributed to my great uncle, Brian Baschnagel, as a player. The first memory I have from a fan was 1987 with the headbands. The next one, we talked to a Michigan fan. Hello, Heisman. The Desmond Howard Heisman pose kind of encapsulates the John Cooper era. And this was, of course, the Heisman winning moment for Desmond Howard, a team that was much better than Ohio State at this time. But in 1995, the Ohio State Buckeyes, headlined by Eddie George and Orlando Pace and all those guys, they were the ones that were the favorites. And Tishominga, Biaka Batuka went off on the Ohio State Buckeyes. This is another Michigan memory, but rather a bad memory for Ohio State more so than anything. I talk about the great memories with Ohio State fans all week long, and then it's always followed up with, or at least for some of them, the ones that are old enough to remember. The worst one, though, that Biaka Batuka game. Where did that come from? Tishominga, Biaka Batuka. Tim Biaka Batuka going off on Ohio State, beating what was a national championship contender. Now, in 1996, Michigan would have also beat Ohio State, or did also beat Ohio State, even though Ohio State was going to the Rose Bowl with a chance to win the national championship with them, what I think historically is viewed as a better team in my eyes. Not being alive, of course, being born in 2000, I didn't see these play out, but based on what I've seen about these two teams, the 96 team, they did not have Eddie George, but Pepe Pearson was no slouch. They had Orlando pace. They did kind of play back and forth with the quarterbacks, but they had really good receivers like David Boston, and they had Dimitri Stanley, really good. But their defense was absolutely amazing, headlined by true freshman Andy Katzmoyer, current coaches Mike Vrabel and Luke Fickell, Matt Finkes on the defensive line, defensive back Sean Springs. I mean, this Ohio State team was absolutely loaded with talent. And 1996, Michigan was able to get it as underdogs yet again, knocking Ohio State out of the national championship. Ohio State still went on to the Rose Bowl and won it, knocking off Jake the Snake Plummer in Arizona State, who was also in the national championship hunt. But this is where we go to the favorite here, and we get a memory from Woodson and Boston, that fight. Of course, Michigan ended up winning this game 20-14. It was competitive. Ohio State in 97 was a really good team. But this was a national championship team, the only national championship team since the 40s for Michigan. This was the best Michigan team that they had since the 40s, and that's the bottom line. And they were able to get it done against a pretty solid Ohio State team because they were one of the best teams in America at that time. They, of course, split that national title with Nebraska in 97. And then John Cooper gets fired in 2000, and I argue to you guys that he didn't get fired because of his lack of success in the game, but rather he got fired because of the fact that his teams were falling off. But that pressure of the game makes John Cooper the running joke in Ohio, and there's a legacy that John Cooper built up. A great coach. There's a reason why he was around at Ohio State for 13 years. But let's just say Michigan fans love John Cooper even more than Ohio State fans because of the intensity of the rivalry. Though I will say to all of you that want to argue against the rivalry, I'm talking about this tradition, and we'll get there in a second. I think it's blown out of proportion that John Cooper may or may not have been fired due to the fact that he kept losing to Michigan. I don't really think that was the case, but I think going forward now, I think a coach cannot lose to Michigan too many times or they're going to get pushed out of town. And it started with what this guy was able to do. In 01, they were able to get it done against the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and it seemed like they were not going to be able to do that in a big-time drive to lead them to victory in 01 with Craig Krenzel quarterbacking, a young quarterback at that point. They end up going into the 2002 season with a lot of momentum, star freshman running back. But the memory that was brought up to me was the Will Allen interception, just the ending that game and beating Michigan for a second consecutive year. It is eerily similar to another memory on the other side that we're going to get to here in a little bit. And I guarantee you guys are going to get there here soon. Will Allen sealing it just not only punched Ohio State's ticket to the national championship game, but it also established dominance through the series that would continue in the game of the century. This was supposed to be the turning point for the Michigan Wolverines. In 05, another spectacular drive in Ann Arbor that got Ohio State a late touchdown, headlined by a spectacular grab by Anthony Gonzalez to get them near the goal line and Antonio Pittman punching it in. And to me, the memory I remember as I was a very young kid, and I've seen this game so many times, I vaguely remember watching that Antonio Pittman touchdown run. My dad talked about the play action pass where it was a spectacular fake by the Heisman Trophy winner, Troy Smith, and chucked it deep down to Ted Ginn Jr., and the game of the century ended 42-39. Now, obviously, it wasn't a happy ending for Ohio State and all, but this was a great day to be an Ohio State Buckeye nonetheless. We go to 2013, and this was an Ohio State team that was one game away from going to the national championship to play what would have likely been Florida State in the national championship, as I assume Auburn would not have been able to jump. Later in that day, of course, we had the kick six. It was the same day as this. But the near upset, and due to the cleanliness of my channel, I'm not going to talk, or I am going to talk about, but not going to show the fact that Marcus Hall flipped the bird to 110,000 at Michigan Stadium in Ann Arbor. But Dontre Wilson starting this little fight going on, it kind of set the tone for the game. Michigan was there. I mean, there's video of them in the tunnel going back at each other like this, just yelling at each other, jawing at each other, trying to shove and get closer while Many coaches, staffers, and security are trying to keep them separated. Successfully did keep them separated. Thank goodness. No idea what would have happened. I think that was halftime of that game. 42-41, a failed 2-point conversion picked off by Von Bell in the end zone. And Ohio State survived as they were to go on the following year and win the national championship. And Ohio State now establishing through a decade and a half of national relevance, while Michigan had peaks of national relevance. But overall, Michigan became largely irrelevant. They started to gain a little bit back in 2015, 3 losses, and they were a couple of them pretty close losses, and Ohio State was able to dominate them in Ann Arbor following an Ohio State loss that knocked them out. But 2016 was really supposed to be the turning point. But it almost seems like since the turn of the decade, all the biggest games had been played in the Horseshoe. But everybody talks about the spot, and everybody talks about the Curtis Samuel touchdown. You see the poster right behind me. This is the poster. This is the game that was just, that was the most emotional Ohio State-Michigan game that I had ever lived through. The 2013 game was very fun, but I was 12 years old. I was more mature at this moment. Still not. I was 15 years old during this game. This game was absolutely everything, and Ohio State laid it out on the line. But this game was also everything. We were underdogs, and I couldn't sleep the night before. We had gone to visit out of state, some family, and we had traveled back on Black Friday night. I was watching football in the car. I remember watching Oklahoma and Will Grier go at each other. It was like a 59-52 game or something like that. No defense played in that. Or 62-55 or something like that. Well, we got home at about 2 or 3 a.m. 2 or 3 a.m. we got home. I was up by 6 o'clock. I could not sleep. There was no sleeping when it comes to this game. I was so nervous about it. Michigan had looked like the best defense in America. And what did Dwayne Haskins and this team do? 62 burger. Chris Olave had his breakout at two touchdown catches, and he had a block punt, which is the play that sticks out to me because I was still nervous to that point. And up until that point, we had that block punt. It was still a relatively close game, and that just sealed it up to me. It was over by that point. And man, oh man, this was probably my favorite memory, or my favorite viewer memory of watching Ohio State versus Michigan. Just that game, of course. We could talk about the 14 national championship, which was a spectacular year for young Colin, but then we get to the next couple of years, which wasn't great for young Colin, but a couple of the people that I am friends with or I work with, they just love this. Michigan ends the drought. And I had previously mentioned that all these big-time matchups, they are played out in the Horseshoe since the turn of the century. This was really the first big-time national championship implication matchup that was played out in Ann Arbor. And Hassan Haskins getting his 5 touchdowns, 42-27, absolutely dominating an Ohio State front that was absolutely exposed. Michigan goes on to win the Big Ten for the first time since 2004, in which they had a share of the title. Just a spectacular day to be a Michigan Wolverine fan. And then we go to last year. For me, it seemed like we were going to flip the script. We were going to get it back, and we were going to be able to get our rivalry game back. We looked like we had improved, and they did, to their credit. They were able to go to the playoff and compete with Georgia. But there is nothing like what Donovan Edwards was able to do to seal it up. Very 2002-esque for Michigan, but they did not finish with the championship, of course. But 2002, Will Allen sealing it up, very similar from my eyes from the other point of view with the Don, because this showed an establishment that the rivalry is swung back into Michigan's favor. One win doesn't swing it back into Michigan's favor, but the second one, doing it in the shoe. And this was yet another big game in the shoe between these two. It swings it back in Michigan's favor. But with Ohio State's last decade of dominance, my question to you guys is this. If Ohio State wins tomorrow, does that swing the rivalry back into Ohio State's favor? And then if Michigan wins tomorrow, what does that do to the national perspective of Ryan Day and the fan base perspective of Ryan Day? But then also, is it going to feel like a changing of guard at Michigan and a final hurrah for Michigan? Or will we see this Michigan program really battle through this adversity and come back just as strong as they are now? This game that we have tomorrow has more storylines than any of the ones that I had laid out. This game has national championship or bust implications on it. You have one coach needing to prove that he can beat the Michigan Wolverines without all of Urban Meyer's players, and another one needing to prove that during the week his team is going to be tougher, and on game day, even without me, they're going to be able to go and win because of the culture that I built here. That's what Jim Harbaugh's set out to do. What Ryan Day is set out to do is show that he is a Buckeye great head coach, and he's going to leave a legacy at Ohio State. These guys, at the end of the day, if we had a full scope, I believe could end up being like these two. Not necessarily friends like these two are. I don't think we're going to get a photo like this with those two because they cannot stand each other. But I tell you what, the intensity of these games, the emotions of these games, I get goosebumps and butterflies just thinking about it. I get goosebumps and butterflies just thinking about how I felt before the last 3 games. And you can even talk about the year that they didn't play, all the drama there, the hang 100, the canceling the game, the snitching on Ryan Day. That year had a bunch of drama built into this rivalry game. I promise you this. This is the best rivalry game in all of American sports. In all of sports, I cannot think of 2 fan bases that go at each other's necks more than this. Auburn and Alabama fans, you can talk. You can try to say something, but at the end of the day, if it's Alabama versus Ohio State in the national championship, you Auburn fans are rooting for Alabama. Those Michigan fans ain't rooting for Ohio State. They're rooting for Alabama. Ditto the other way. If Auburn versus Michigan is in the national championship, those Alabama fans are rooting for Auburn to bring it home for the SEC. Ohio State wants to see Michigan lose by 70. Me not even caring about the rematch, I love seeing Michigan lose against TCU last year. I try to take my emotions out of it when it comes to it, but man, just as a fan perspective, I love seeing that. I don't think any other rivalry is that way. And I'm pretty sure that's the case. You want to talk about Iron Bowl moments, and all of them from the Alabama side is, the 2021 Bryce Young drive. And then all of them on the Auburn side is, the 2010 comeback or the kick 6. There's no memories that go beyond 2010. These memories that I have here are spread out through the last 50 years. Ohio State and Michigan is a far superior rivalry game. And we are going to see that displayed on Saturday. And for you Barstool clowns who want to claim that Auburn and Alabama is better because they shoot each other, LSU and Alabama fans shoot each other. They're irrational. At least, we don't commit murder because we don't like the other team. We won't talk to them. We won't associate with them sometimes, especially on these days. We need to be separated. My gosh. Auburn, Alabama. Texas and Oklahoma is closer to Ohio State and Michigan than Auburn and Alabama. A fake rivalry there. So there's my little TED Talk. The history of this rivalry is unmatched in the sport, and nobody can convince me otherwise. I don't think that it's really much of a debate in my mind. But with that being said, guys, thank you for tuning in. I'll get the preview out probably in the morning, so be on lookout for that. And we will see you guys tomorrow. Have a good rivalry weekend. Go Bucks and Muck Fishigan.